Hi, and thank you all for joining us today. We are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. Again, I'm always grateful that you're here. And I just want to reiterate that welcome to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled, where we can hopefully help you discover your truth. Today, we're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, which is 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Please join us in one of our various chat rooms to connect with the various hosts and guests that appear on many of these broadcasts. Today, we're excited to welcome Jerry Marzinsky. Now, I want to just give you a little background about him, and then, of course, I'm going to bring him in and let him talk about his prestigious career, what he's uncovered, and the topic that we're talking about today is spiritual warfare, demonic attachments explained, their causes, effects, and solutions. Jerry Marzinsky is a retired licensed psychotherapist. He has over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Jerry is also a commercial pilot, a certified scuba diver, and a long-distance motorcyclist. He has held the position of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scoutmaster. He was also awarded the State of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and Pima College Apple Award for teaching abnormal psychology. That's a mouthful. He's got a really prestigious career. His formal academic training comprises of a BA in psychology from Temple University and a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, with 2 years study in a Ph.D. psychology program. He's also the author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, and is currently in his own private practice. So let me bring Jerry. Hey, Jerry, thank you so much for being with us today.
Glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much. You have such a prestigious career, and I've been following you on social media for quite some time, and I'm so impressed with what you've discovered, all the work that you've put into it, decades of work, and I want folks to get a good understanding of what you've unearthed during your studies and your experience with these psychotic patients, schizophrenic particularly. So if you could, I'll drop off for a minute or two and let you kind of take the helm and just explain to folks, all of what we talked about in your bio and where we are today. So take it away, Jerry.
Okay. Well, I spent probably 55 years total working in mental health in the United States. And I've worked in virtually every kind of position that they have here. I started off in one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, where after graduate school. And I started seeing that what they taught me in graduate school didn't fit with what I was actually experiencing, okay? In a number of different ways. I think one of the most important was that I found that the voices that schizophrenics hear are not auditory hallucinations, as Big Pharma and the psychiatric mafia want you to believe. These are entities. They have different levels of intelligence. They're demonic in nature. They run very specific patterns. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Okay, so they run 23 different patterns that we found. Okay, and started off when I got to this big state hospital. I saw that schizophrenics, when they were listening to their voices, would get in trouble. They'd get in all kinds of trouble. They'd get in fights. They wouldn't go to classes. They were always in trouble listening to the voices. So there seemed to be a one-to-one correlation between their listening to the voices and they're getting in some kind of trouble. Okay? So I started asking around, what are these voices? What causes schizophrenia? And the answer I got was the same stuff that they taught me in graduate school. Well, schizophrenia is due to a biochemical imbalance in the person's brain. And that's what I thought when I got there. But after a year or two, I noticed that psychiatrists never, ever gave any kind of baseline test for chemical imbalance. There was no lab test. There was no EEG, EKG, no kind of objective test. So you figure if they're treating a chemical imbalance, there must be some baseline as to what that imbalance is so they can straighten out that imbalance. But I never saw it. They never gave any kind of test before they prescribed their psychiatric drugs, which is a whole nother scam in and of itself. I mean, psychiatry is, I would say they're a branch of the deep state. None of their drugs cure anybody. They don't, all they do is tamp down symptoms. They don't cure anything. So here they are dishing out these drugs without, a lot of times spending 15, 20 minutes with the patient and then going, okay, you got this. And they prescribe some drug for it without any kind of baseline. So I asked one time, I said, well, if these guys have chemical imbalances, I mean, shouldn't you have some kind of baseline? Isn't there any kind of test you give them to determines what chemicals are in the brain are out of balance or by how much? I think there's 23 different transmitters, neurotransmitters in the brain, something like that. Which ones are out of balance and by how much? There's no test. It doesn't exist. It never did. Matter of fact, their chemical imbalance theory was a complete lie. It was made up by Eli Lilly when they came out with Prozac in the 70s to sell psychiatric drugs. It never was the truth. They made it up. They made it up to sell drugs. And then the drug companies ran with it. Then they started teaching it in the universities. These drug companies have a tremendous amount of money. They determined what was published about their drugs, what wasn't published about their drugs, the nasty side effects, and the number of people that these drugs actually killed were never published. So they controlled the information about these drugs, right? And they taught all these new psychiatrists and psychologists coming through the institutions that the voices that schizophrenics heard were auditory hallucinations. So I started asking patients what they were telling them. First, I asked everybody else. I mean, I asked the nurses, I asked doctors, well, what are these voices? What are they telling these people? Oh, they're just auditory hallucinations. So when they said hallucinations, I'm thinking well, they sound like word salad, they don't make any sense. They're just these broken, fragmented thoughts. But then I started seeing patients arguing with their voices. They were cussing them and arguing with them, and it looked to me like somebody talking over a telephone. You could hear the person was saying, but you couldn't hear what was coming in on the other line. Okay, and I went, well, that's odd. Who are they speaking to, and what is that thing telling them? So I started asking patients myself, what are the voices telling you? You know, and it took about a year to figure out how to talk to them because the voices don't want them talking about them to anybody. There is no positive benefit for them to talk about their voices. Every time they did, they got into trouble. Say a kid starts hearing voices, he goes to his parents get all upset, they drag him to a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist drugs him up until he's numb, and if he doesn't take the meds, they lock him up. It doesn't result in any positive conclusion for them to talk about their voices. So for the most part, they lose friends if they talk about their voices. They think, oh, you're possessed or you're weird. So especially to psychologists and psychiatrists, because the psychologist at the state hospital and the counselors would kind of like be spies for psychiatry. If a guy went off his drugs, if he started acting out, we needed to turn him into the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist would drug them. They didn't want to take the drugs; they gave them injections.
Yeah.
So we were kind of like the enemy, and a lot of these schizophrenic patients did not want to tell. After they found out what psychiatry does to them, after they talk about their voices, they didn't want to tell the psychiatrists about the voices. So the psychiatrist would spend like 20 minutes with them, once a month, say, well, how's your voices? And they would say, well, I'm not hearing them, or they're getting less. They would lie to the psychiatrist because every time they told them that, yeah, they're still there and they're still bothering me, they would up the amount of medication they gave them until half of them were drooling. I mean, they couldn't see straight. Their vision was blurred. They were just like walking zombies. So breaking into that area was tricky. So like I said, it took me about a year before I could figure out how to talk to him. And I got pieces of information, just one piece at a time. One schizophrenic would tell me something, while the voices, they don't say anything good. They're negative. All right. They're derogatory. They're destructive. They're insulting. They're nasty. They're negative. So I would keep that in mind, and then I would ask the next one, what are your voices like? They wouldn't want to tell me, and I'd say, well, I understand they're negative, they're derogatory, they're ugly, they're nasty, and they would go, yeah, they are. I go, well, what else can you tell me about them? So this went on for years, literally years. And piece by piece, these patterns started appearing. But there was a lot of resistance. I remember one patient that he didn't want to talk about his voices. And he went to the psychiatrist and told the psychiatrist, hey, this guy's asking me questions about my voices and I don't like it. It's upsetting me.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the psychiatrist's office that next morning being ordered, you will not ask these patients anything about their voices again. They're hallucinations. What you're doing by asking them questions about them is you're reinforcing those hallucinations, and you're making the patient worse. I didn't see that, but I had to be very careful after that. And then that happened again with another psychiatrist. They wouldn't even let you ask questions about what the voices were before shutting you down.
Yeah.
So I had to be very careful while I was working at the state hospital to not upset the patient by asking them too many questions. Right. So I had to drive with the brakes on. There were three things I found, three patterns I found while I was working there over 7 years. Okay. And as soon as I thought I found one pattern, then I'd start asking all these other schizophrenics whether they experienced this same pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So the first pattern I found was that these voices were consistently, irreversibly negative. They were always negative. They hardly ever said anything positive. And if they did say something positive, it was to sneak around behind the person later and stab them in the back.
Yeah.
It was to get their trust. When they
Right.
first appeared, they'd say stuff like, I'm Jesus Christ, or I'm a spirit that can help you, or, I've got special powers, or, and sometimes they did. They knew stuff that the person didn't know. Um, so they would try to get their trust and make it look like they were their friends, and then they would slowly turn negative and start insulting and berating them and treating them rotten. Okay, so the first pattern I found is that they were negative. They were consistently, irreversibly negative. Yeah, and the question is what is it that holds them on a consistently negative trajectory? Why aren't they random?
Right.
Like all other hallucinations. I've seen lots of hallucinations working in the hospitals I did. None of them were the same. They were all different. They were all random. You know. So what is holding these voices to a negative trajectory? Why aren't they random? This was one of my first questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I started questioning hundreds of schizophrenics. What are the voices like? Are they negative? What do they say? It was always negative stuff. The next thing I found was that they were anti-religious. I had one guy come into my office once, and I was talking to him about the voices. He said, when the voices come, I prayed the 23rd Psalm, and the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
Wow.
And I went, that's interesting. So I started passing out the 23rd Psalm to the patients I was working with. I said, repeat this when your voices come, and let me know what happens. The voices always reacted to the 23rd Psalm very negatively. They got very upset with it. They would act out. They'd become volatile. Um, and it was like, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? So I started asking these patients, well, what happens when you go to church? Because a lot of them sensed that something was spiritually wrong, and they would try to go to church. And they broke down into 3 categories. It was fairly interesting. If the voices were very weak, they would shut up when they got into the church. If they were of moderate strength, they would get louder when they went into the church. If they were very strong, they would drive the person out of the church, totally out of the church. Um, so
I'm just sharing the 23rd Psalm so people can,
okay.
yeah, get just so that in case folks want to read it and they can go look it up. But go ahead.
Yeah, so they hated the 23rd Psalm. Turned out they hated the 91st Psalm. They didn't want people reading the Bible. They would tell schizophrenics, well, why are you reading about Jesus? He couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you?
Right.
That was like a consistent thing that they would say. So that was another pattern that didn't make any sense. Why would a hallucination be anti-religious?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't make any sense. The the third one I found was that they created and fostered negative emotion. So the reason that they were saying negative, derogatory, abusive, nasty things was to generate negative emotion.
Right.
And it turned out that they would, once they generated it, then the person would be drained of energy. So it was a one-to-one correlation. When the voices showed up after they left, that schizophrenic was drained. It was drained. They would say, I couldn't even get up to get breakfast. I was too weak to get breakfast. So that was another consistent reporting, is that after the voices attacked, they were drained of energy. So there was a one-to-one correlation between the voices showing up and them having their energy gone.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was like, where is that energy going? Because most of them, the voices attack the strongest at night when the sun goes down, and they get strongest between 3 and 4 in the morning. So they're usually attacking.
Time. 3 o'clock in the morning is the hour that most people get hauntings and things of that nature. They always strike after 3.
Yeah. And I found it strange that they got louder after the sun went down. And when I was working in a nursing facility with old people that had something called sundowner syndrome, when the sun went down, they got crazy. They started acting out. I found that fairly strange too. So there was a 1-to-1 correlation between these voices showing up and the patient's energy being missing. Okay. So I would ask them about that. I said, do you notice that after the voices come and leave, that your energy level's gone? And they had never noticed it before. Once I brought it up, they noticed it. And then I said, well, where did your energy go? And they went, well, I don't know. So here I am questioning scores of these guys and saying, every time the voices come, and they probably come thousands and thousands of times over the years these guys were hearing voices, your energy disappears, right? They go, well, yeah. I said, well, where do you think it goes? I don't know. So I'd ask them, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times and each time you got burnt, what's burning you? They had no trouble with the fire. And then I'd repeat the thing again. The voices have come to you thousands of times, and each time that they came, you were drained of your energy. Where do you think your energy went? I'd say 90% of them would go, I don't know. 10% of them would go, the voices took it? Like questioning. They were being blocked from realizing that there was a correlation between the voices and their energy being missing. Okay, so that's what some people call loosh. So they're feeding off of their energy.
Right.
Yeah. So they're feeding off of all negative energy, and I could feel that when I was working in the psychology department in the state prison. You walk into that prison, and you could feel the difference.
Sure.
It was a very low vibration. Okay. So there was something going on with these things. I mean, if they're running patterns, they couldn't be hallucinations. But I didn't know what they were.
When you tried to bring this to your superiors,
I didn't even try. There was no way. No way.
Yeah. So what was that like? Like, did you know from the get-go that it wasn't going to be met with any sense of...
Sure, yeah. If they're criticizing me for just asking questions about the voices, what are they going to do? Matter of fact, I didn't talk to anybody about what I was finding the whole time I was working for the state, because I knew what they would do. I'd either end up in the psychiatrist's office or, they'd fire me. They weren't having any of it. So as more of these patterns came onto line, I couldn't talk to anybody about them. Okay. So the other thing I noticed is that the voices didn't like the psychiatric medications. Patients would not stay on them for any length of time before they went off and went psychotic again. And that intrigued me too. It's like these medications were calming them down to the point where they could at least function. Right? They went off those medications, they would again go psychotic. So I started asking them about that. It's like, you've gone off your medications before, and each time you did, you went nuts. Do you want to be nuts? Do you want to be crazy? And they'd go, no. Go, why'd you go off the meds? And they would say, well, because of the side effects. The side effects are awful. That's true. the side effects are awful. These drugs are toxic. They are neurotoxins. These antipsychotic drugs shrink the person's brain. They destroy brain cells with long-term use. They do permanent neurological damage. And the psychiatric mafia will not tell these people about that. And the big pharma, they suppress any information about that anywhere. They will not let any article be published about that at all. So that's demonic in and of itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen documentaries of children that are born with schizophrenia. Do you think in those cases as well that they're demonic and attachments, and they're just attaching themselves to children? Like, have you worked with any children?
Well, for the most part, I didn't. But when I did go to work for the last 10 years of my working for somebody else, I was working psych crisis in the emergency rooms in all the big hospitals around Tucson. I've never seen or heard of a child being born schizophrenic. Matter of fact, I didn't think that kids got schizophrenia until I started being called down to the pediatric section of the emergency room, where I started seeing 8 and 9-year-old kids who were hearing voices. And that was hard for me to fathom. So kids get it. I think there is a generational aspect to it. It runs in the family, but I'm thinking it's not genetic. They haven't found any genetic connection. But what it looks like is that the schizophrenic parents treat their kids in such a manner as to foster schizophrenia in the children.
Right.
So here's all these patterns appearing, and I was curious about the medications. I'm like, okay, schizophrenia, the symptoms of schizophrenia are much worse than the medication side effects. I mean, you have hallucinations of demons chasing you and attacking you and sexually molesting you, and it's like your worst nightmare, So it's like, what's worst? In my opinion, from what I saw, being schizophrenic is much worse than the side effects of these toxic drugs that they're giving them. So I ran some tests. What I did is I got all the symptoms of schizophrenia, the auditory hallucinations, the tactile hallucinations, all the awful stuff about them, and got them all on a check sheet. And then when a patient went off of his drugs, after he was back on them again, I brought him into my office and I said, "Why'd you go off your drugs?" Of course, they gave me the side effects are awful. Okay, granted, that's the standard excuse. But I said, you tell me, I want you to write down on this blank sheet of paper all the side effects you've had, because they didn't get the same side effects. So they write them down, and then I'd take that, and then I'd give them this check sheet of all the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And I said, check each one of these bad things about schizophrenia that you suffered. And they did that, and then I'd give them both the sheets back. I'd look at them. They checked a whole lot more bad things about the schizophrenia. I'd give them both back and say, which was worst? Was it the side effects or was it the medications? Was it the medications or was it the schizophrenia, the symptoms of schizophrenia? They all chose, well, the symptoms of schizophrenia are much worse. Well, then why'd you go off your meds? Well, I don't know. I thought it was the side effects. It was the same thing with all of them. The actual symptoms of schizophrenia were much worse than the side effects of the medications. And they kept going off the medications anyway.
So these demonic attachments were like telling them to go off because they didn't want them on the medications, obviously, because it was in some way blocking the transmission, maybe.
Yeah, just like when they were blocking the transmission of um, the energy being stolen, taking the stolen. Um, the other thing I saw is that schizophrenics were assaulting hospital psychiatrists at a rate far above anybody else at the state hospital. They were always getting punched or slapped or physically
Mhm.
assaulted. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. They're only spending 15 or 20 minutes a month with them, you know?
Right.
And yet they're being assaulted more than doctors, nurses, psychiatric nurses, counselors, dentists, anybody else. You know, I'm like, why are they being assaulted at such a rate? What are they saying to these people that are setting them off in such a short time? It was at the end of the I worked there 7 years. It was in the seventh year that I found out. There was this one gal. What happened at the psych rehab center where I was working is if they went off their medications 3 times, we would usually discharge them because the medications were the only thing keeping them sane. And if they were going to get a job, they had to stay sane. So if
But
they couldn't,
how did they go off their medication if they were inpatient? Didn't they watch them take the medication? And because I've seen that in so many movies too, where they would literally watch them swallow it and stuff. So how did
yeah,
these patients go?
they would put the ones who they caught not taking it on watch swallow. But for the most part, they'd hide it under their tongue.
Right.
They'd tuck it away somewhere, and they would, the nurses. There were hundreds of patients there.
Yeah.
They didn't have the time to make everybody open their mouth and and
Right.
check under their tongue and behind their cheeks and that kind of stuff. So they just pretty much dish them out. They'd have them come, they'd hand it to them, and then give them some water and take it. The ones that they caught not taking it, they would put them on watch swallow and they would watch them take it, especially
Yeah.
if they were causing problems. But if the patient wasn't causing problems, they didn't take the
Right.
time to watch swallow them.
Yeah.
Okay. So they would what they that reminds me of it. Let me digress a little while. There was one time when I was probably the first year I was there. I was doing rounds on the first floor of this big psychiatric unit, and here was maintenance cutting the bottom part of this railing. So this was a banister that went up to the second floor of the psychiatric unit. At the top floor, at the second floor, there was no cap on that banister. Okay. So I noticed that, but I didn't think anything of it. And here's this maintenance man cutting the bottom cap off. And I'm like, why is he cutting the bottom cap off that banister? So that was the most exciting thing going on at that moment. So there was a bunch of patients watching the smoke and the sparks fly, and I just joined them, and I was just there with them watching the sparks. And it's like the 4th of July indoors. And as soon as that cap fell off, there was this flood of psychiatric medications come out that banister.
Oh my
Thousands, thousands and thousands of pills
God.
that they had been throwing down that banister for decades. They just came out like a waterfall and just spilled all over the floor.
Wow.
All these multicolors. And I started looking at them, and a great many of them were antipsychotic drugs.
Yeah.
They weren't taking them. So that was like, again, each one of those pills was a vote by a psychotic patient to stay psychotic. Why was that happening? I saw that before I started questioning them, and it really got my attention because you're talking thousands of pills. And so I started asking them those questions. And then the 7th year, here's this gal who was doing good. She was in cosmetology class. She was doing good. She was making good grades. She was going to graduate with a state certification for cosmetology. She went off her drugs a 3rd time. Okay. So the rule was we had to discharge them at that point. And it was a shame because she was doing well. So I had to call her mother and say, okay, she's being discharged. She won't stay on her drugs. And the mother virtually begged me, please don't do that. I can't deal with her here. She won't stay on her drugs here either. I'll come up there and we'll find out why she won't stay on her drugs. And I felt sorry for the woman. So I said, okay, come on up here Friday in the afternoon and we'll bring her in and we'll see if we can't find out why she went off her drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I already knew it wasn't the side effects. I knew this, the schizophrenia was worse than the side effects.
Yeah.
So the mother came in and we're sitting in the office and we brought her in and we started asking her, why did you go off your drugs? You had your certificate. You were about to graduate. You sabotaged yourself at the last minute. Why did you do that? Why did you stop taking your drugs? And, I said, it's not the side effects, because what happens to you when you're psychotic, when you're schizophrenic, is worse than the side effects. You know that. She knew that. She was aware. So why did you go off them again? This is the third time. You knew if you went off them the third time, you're going to get thrown out of the program. Why? Why'd you do this? And her mother's begging her to tell us also. So she said, you won't believe me. And I told her, I said, well, I've heard a lot of strange things working at this psychiatric hospital. I don't think you're going to tell me anything that's going to freak me out.
Right.
Why did you go off those meds when you were about to graduate? You just threw your whole career down the tubes. Why did you do that? And she says, the voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me with the drugs.
Oh,
and they pointed to the side effects of the drugs as the effects of being poisoned. Pretty slick, because those toxic effects of the drugs were toxic effects. She was being poisoned slowly, and it was the truth. And that explained, something clicked in my head. That explained why all these psychiatrists were being assaulted. The voices were telling those guys the same thing.
They were being poisoned, right?
Right. The psychiatrist is poisoning you. The psychiatrist is evil. Look at what he's doing to you. Look at the side effects of these medications. These medications are poison. That explained it right there. Yeah.
So what do you do after working in this hospital, within this system, knowing all this, having this information, knowing you can't share it to help folks? What did you do with it? Like, what did you try to help?
Well, I had to be careful about that, because psychiatry and psychology weren't buying into any of this, And even at that point, even at 7 years, I wasn't convinced that these things were demons. I was still, I didn't want to believe in demons. I just kept pushing that out of my mind. And the evidence just kept building and building and building, And I probably didn't realize that these voices were demons until after 10 years of working at the state prison.
Oh, wow.
What happened? I didn't want to believe it. I just kept pushing it out of my mind, and no, it can't be. It's something to do with their subconscious mind, or something's wrong somewhere. It's something else. I didn't want to believe in demons, but the more and more evidence kept pouring in.
Was there a pivotal moment for you where you just said it's demonic in nature, or
yes,
was it?
And it was very traumatic. So here's all these patterns. At the state hospital, I had to be very careful. Because they didn't want me, the psychiatrist didn't want me asking questions about the voices. They didn't want anybody investigating that. They didn't want anybody believing that they were anything other than auditory hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd already been in trouble twice for it. I had to be like in first gear the whole time. Just very slow, very methodical, not pushing real hard, just getting bits of information here and there. And gathering things that way,
Yeah.
But when I got to the state prison and got hired by the psychology department there, what was happening? They started closing down state hospitals all over the country. It started with Proposition 13 in California, which was a tax rebellion, and the freaking government there went, well, if you don't want to pay taxes, we're going to cut out the psychiatric hospitals, and we're going to release these guys in the community, and we're going to start mental health centers, and they can go to the mental health centers. But
Yeah. Sounds
these people. These people didn't have cars. They didn't have resources to go
right.
across town to, and
Sure.
they weren't taking those medicines anyway.
Right.
What makes them think that they're going to go through the trouble and expense to take these same nasty medications from a mental health center that's overcrowded, and they're dishing them out again? It was a massive failure. It was an
Yeah.
absolute abject failure. So here's all these people living on the streets who are psychotic now.
And we have that today still.
We have that today. So how are they going to survive? They can't work. So what are they going to do? They're going to sell drugs. They're going to rob people. They're going to burglarize people. They're going to commit crimes to survive.
Right.
And where do they end up? They end up in a prison where it costs it's a lot more expensive to keep a prisoner in prison than it is to keep a patient in a psych hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the very opposite effect of what they were trying to do. So
Right.
here's all these schizophrenics, and after getting out of the state hospital, I worked in a mental health center for a while with drug abusers, and it was a relief to be away from schizophrenics. So they were driving me crazy. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and it was driving me nuts. And it was like, I just need to get away from these guys. Just get me away from them.
For your own sanity.
Yeah, for my own sanity. It was like, so I was working with alcoholics and drug addicts in the mental health center, staying away from the schizophrenics. And after that, I started working in a emergency room in the county hospital doing psych crisis. And then here's the schizophrenics again. All right. Then I found a job at the prison, which was a secure job, okay, in the psychology department. And here were the schizophrenics again.
Yeah.
The prison was flooded with them. They were all over the place. So I'm like, oh no, here we go again. No, not again. So it was like, but they intrigued me. It was like, what is going on with these people? What is going on with them? So I knew some. So what I did is I got groups of prisoners who were willing to tell me what the voices were telling them in real time in our sessions. Okay. And, they weren't talking to anybody else about them, but that took some trust on their part, because what other psychologists were doing was, if they went off their meds, they'd tell the psychiatrist and then they get hauled in. So, I was walking a real tightrope there. The groups were working great, because I had direct insight into their minds at that point.
Sure.
The voices are telling me this. They're telling me you're stupid, you're crazy, you're not to listen to anything you're saying, And I said, well, what were they telling you last night? Well, this is what they were telling me. So I had a direct insight into what they were hearing, and what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. And that was fascinating, where most of the other psychics in the prison could only stand working with those guys for 20 minutes. I was in there for 2-3 hours picking through their heads, because it was just very interesting what they were experiencing.
Were you documenting all this information too? Like for your own edification?
You see all these notebooks behind you? It's full of stories of them. I need to get those out and start putting them out on podcasts and stuff.
Yeah.
They're all full of matter of fact, I have one story I can read you, which is pretty interesting if I can find it. I have it on my desk here somewhere before we leave. I'll try to find it. I also have some poems written by a psychotic killer.
I saw your interview with Mark where you had the mother on.
Yes.
That was very interesting. Yeah, that was her. I want to ask you, I have so many questions to ask you, but let's get started and talk about the premise of good and evil. Because historically, there's always been, you could go back to that religion, what was it called? Zoroastrianism, where the concept was there's good, there's evil, and there's just this battle between them, and that will, that's the way it will be always, this battle between good and evil. So personally, obviously you believe in that premise, right?
Oh
In,
yeah.
in evil. So what's the difference between the voices that we hear every day, people that are not schizophrenic, and the negative self-talk that our ego, that we call it, or our consciousness tells us? What's the difference between that voice and the voice the schizophrenic hears? Is there a difference? Does it sound different? Does it feel different? I mean, you must have unearthed that information.
Yes, yes. And matter of fact, there was one time I prayed. Uh, I said, good Lord, let me experience these voices so
Oh,
I can see what they were like.
yeah,
That's a story in and of itself. You want me to tell you that story?
absolutely.
Okay. So, I prayed. Well, what do they sound like? What are they like? Yeah. So by that time, I was a certified scuba diver. I loved the water. I was like a fish in the water. I'd done scores of dives. I loved to swim. So in order to kind of get my head back together after working at the psych hospital all day, I was living on a lake in central Georgia. And at sunset, I would go out and I would start swimming because the water was calmer. The motorboats were disappearing. And, here's this one night I went out there and I was a good swimmer. I was in good shape. And I hit my stride. It was like, I was taking in as much air as I needed. I adjusted my output to where I was just a machine cutting through the water. And I went into like a meditation trance, just stroking, and the water was bath warm. It was just very calm. It was very glass like water. And in no time I started feeling tired, and I went, wow, I wonder how long I've been doing this. And I looked up and I was way far from shore.
Mm.
And I set out at about sunset, when the sun was about to go down. And I looked back at the shore and I went, whew, I'm too tired to make it back there.
Oh,
But I wasn't worried about it. I mean, it didn't bother me at all. I mean, they taught us the survival thing, which is, what you do is you take in a big breath of air, you put your hands behind your back, you know, kind of like that, and you just float like a dead man. So
yeah.
your face is underwater, your back is above the water, your legs are hanging down. Okay, and when you run out of air, you whip your head up, you blow the air out real fast, and as soon as you do that, you start sinking. All right, so you're on your way down. Before your head goes under, you have to fill your head with your lungs with air again. Okay, so keep your head up and you're sucking it in, and as you're going down, you're still sucking in air, and then fill your lungs, and then you sink down maybe 3 feet, and then you bob up to the surface again, and your head floats back down, and your back is your head, your legs are hanging, your arms are just hanging there, and there's no effort. You know,
Wow.
you could just do that when you run out of air. You do it again. You whip your head up, blow the air out, take in another breath. And it takes no effort. You're resting. You're actually resting in the water.
Sure.
All right. So uh, here I am doing that, and as I'm sinking, this thought comes into my head. Uh, you're sinking. It's getting to be sunset. The lights are going to start going off on the shore. You're going to get disoriented. You're too tired to make it back to the shore the way you are now. And it sounded just like my regular thoughts. There wasn't any like, you are nothing like that. Just
Right.
sounded like all the thousands of other thoughts that came through my head. But I noticed it was a yes set. It was like what a salesman does to you. He gets a vacuum cleaner and turns it on. And he shows you how well it works, and you like how well it works, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Well, you like how convenient it is, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, you'd like to have one of these, wouldn't you? Well, they want you to say yeah. So here's this yes set coming up, and all the conditions it said were true. I was too far to make it back to the shore. I was too tired. Uh, it was getting dark. Some of the lights were starting to come on the at night, and it's telling me, know, that came on. So I'm like, I wonder what's going on there, you know. So I go under again, and then come back up again, and here comes this thought again. Hey, you're too tired to make it back to the shore. The sun's going down. You're going to get disoriented. You're not going to be able to see the shore once the light's going off.
Mhm.
All these things that were true, and then it added to it, and you're going to drown.
Oh,
And
gee.
I'm like,
Your
wait,
own, was
my
that
own.
your own thought?
No, it sounded like my own thoughts, but I knew it wasn't because I wasn't the least bit concerned about drowning. It was not even
Oh,
it was not. There was no concern whatsoever. I
was the
knew what to
tone
do.
different? Did it feel like it came from a different place? Like,
No, it
no,
felt like it just appeared in my head, and like
yeah.
I'm thinking, like, why would I tell myself I would drown? I'm not going to drown. I have no intention of drowning. I'm not going to drown. It's not even a worry. I know what to do. I'm perfectly comfortable where I am. I'm like, where did that come from? You know. So, uh, and it came, as I was sinking. So here I'm sinking. After letting the air out, I'm sinking, and it's telling me now you're headed for the bottom. And it's repeating the whole thing, but it adds now you're headed for the bottom. You're too tired to make it to the shore. The lights are going to start going out. You're going to
Mhm.
get disoriented. You're going to drown, and you're heading for the bottom of the lake. And I'm like, so I am, And I'm like, what is this thing? You know, it's not me. I know it wasn't me. I wasn't worried about it. I knew what to do. I was perfectly comfortable in the water. I was freaked out by these thoughts because they were consistent and they would appear every time I popped up at the surface. They would appear. Yeah. So I went, well, what I'm going to do is spite these things. So next time I took the breath, I'm sinking. Okay. And instead of bobbing back up, I let more air out. So I started sinking faster. You know, and then once you hit a certain depth, 10, 15 feet, your lungs are compressed and you lose your buoyancy. So you start sinking like a rock. Okay?
Oh,
So so I hit that point and then I started sinking like a rock and it felt like I was sinking a little faster than I should be. And I went, well, I'm going to hit the surface. So I went back up to the surface. And here's this voice again telling me, it's getting dark, lights are going out, you're headed for the bottom, you're panicked, and you're going to drown. So it took me shooting toward the surface as I was panicking. Even before I got to the surface, I knew what would happen. I was in negative buoyancy. My lungs were collapsed by the water pressure. It happened a million times swimming, scuba diving. It's nothing new. I knew what it was. So, but I was really freaked out with this thing that just kept coming back and telling me these things that I knew weren't true, you know. But it was a little scary because I was out in the middle of the lake. It was
yeah.
dark. It was getting dark.
Were
And
you
here's
making
this.
progress like towards the shore at that
No,
point? Oh,
I was in that same spot. I didn't
oh,
try to get to the shore. I wasn't going to panic. You know, I wasn't. I didn't even feel panicky, except this thing kept going on, and I'm like, well, what is this? What is this thing? So went back up again. Caught my breath, took the breath. I'm sinking, so I let more air out. I kept sinking, and I'm going down and down. I had to equalize the pressure in my ears. I had no idea how deep I was, uh, or where I was headed, or where the bottom of the lake was. Even I just kept going down, and then I felt this cold, freezing cold water moving up my legs. Boom! I shot to the surface again. Even before I got there, I knew what that was. That was the thermocline. It's
yeah.
usually a layer of cold water that sinks down below the warm water, and it usually sits on the bottom of the lake or wherever you're at. I mean, it sits on the bottom. So I got to the top again. Here's this thing again. The lights are, look, the lights are going out. Uh, let me see, where did it come in with that? Yeah, that's where the second thing came in. It was like lights are going out. You're in the middle of the lake. You're too tired to make it back. Um, you're going to get disoriented. Uh, you're going to drown, and there's a motorboat coming right for you. It's going to grind you to pieces. They can't see you.
Word.
But what was strange is underwater, you can hear sounds for a long way. Sound carries a lot further underwater than it does in the air.
Sure.
And I didn't hear a motorboat. So I started looking around, and sure enough, here's this motorboat in the distance coming right toward me. Right. And I'm like, okay, no big deal. If I need to, I'll dive underneath it. I've done that before. I had to dive under motorboats till they passed and get out of the way. I don't like it, but I can do it. I didn't have any problem. I could do it. So I'm watching this thing, and here's this voice telling me, they can't see you. They're heading right for you. That they're going to hit you, knock you out, and they're going to grind you to pieces with that propeller. They can't see you, and that was all true. They couldn't see me. So I'm tracking that motorboat, and I watch it go by, and it maybe rushes by at 40, 50 feet away, and I'm watching it disappear past me, going, well, thank God I didn't have to avoid it. And I go to turn around, and the wake hits me in the face and just washes over me as I'm taking a breath in.
Oh, gee.
So
Why didn't you flag them to help you?
What?
Couldn't you flag them to help you?
No, I wasn't in any trouble as far as I was concerned.
Oh,
I wasn't afraid of drowning.
yeah.
What was freaking me was this thing that was telling me all this garbage. That's
Right.
what was scaring me. What is this thing? It's not me. I'm not afraid of drowning. I'm not worried about it.
You mentioned you asked God to show you or to give you an example of what these voices, and how long after that did this happen?
About 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So that thing washed over me. I took him in a mouthful of water. I spit it out. I started coughing, and that thing was loving that. It goes, look at you're coughing. You're going to drown. You can't make it back to shore. And I'm like going, what in the blazes is this thing? So here I go again. Take the breath, drop to the water, hit the crush depth, start speeding down. I hit the thermocline, but what was weird was that this thermocline wasn't resting right on the bottom. It was resting like 15 or 20 feet above the bottom. So I went all the way through it, and then it was warm again. So I kept sinking, and I had no idea how far down I was. But I was going to go until I almost ran out of breath. I had enough to get back to the surface. I kept sinking, and then all of a sudden I felt this gooky thing crawling up my leg. Boom, I shot to the surface again. Even before I got there, I knew it was the mud at the bottom of the lake.
Oh,
but
my goodness.
I didn't think the lake had mud at the bottom, because as far as I went on the shore, it was all rock. So I thought it was all rock all over the lake. It wasn't. So by the time I got to the surface, I knew what it was. I wasn't worried about it. Got up there, and here's this thing going, you're panicking. Look at you. It's late. It's too you the lights are going out at the shore. Look at the and they were.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it back. And I went, screw you. And I went down again. My feet stuck in the mud, and the water was bath warm. Okay. So I was hanging above the bottom with my knuckles about 6 inches above the bottom of the lake, like a dead man. Just like I was dead. But I was too scared to think, because I couldn't see anything down there. It was pitch black. And here I was, I don't know how many feet, 35, 40 feet underwater, stuck in the mud at the bottom of the lake. And it was like all my senses were off. My sight was off. My smell was off. My hearing was off. My feeling was off. It was like a deprivation chamber. And the only thing that I experience is there wasn't even any thoughts because I was waiting for something else to happen. It's like, okay, what's going to happen next? I was scared, and it was just, all there was I was aware that I was aware. That was it. And that lasted for about 20 seconds before I had to head for the surface. It was the most incredible feeling that I had in my life. And it was like, wow, that's what's there past all these senses. You take away all the senses, all this constant input that's always coming in.
Yes.
That's what's there. An
Wow.
awareness, a
So
silent awareness.
Alone with your own consciousness, really.
Yes.
Right.
It was a peak experience. I'll never forget it. I'm glad it happened.
How did you get back to the shore?
I swam back. I was all rested. It didn't take a lot of energy to sink.
You built
all I was doing was blowing
Yeah.
air out, and I was just sinking naturally. Took a little bit of energy to get to the surface, but after all this was over, I just slowly swam back to shore. No problem.
Goodness gracious, Jerry. So
But
you got a good feeling.
that weirded me out because
Yeah.
I was thinking that the voices would be like, "Where are the voices? Oh yeah, you go kill
Right.
yourself and you
Yeah,
beat this guy up." No, they didn't sound. They sounded just like my own thoughts, but the content was very, very different. So when you say, "How do you tell the difference between the two?"
You
It's
just know.
the content.
Yeah.
Every negative.
I would have to agree with that 1,000%. That's like a great example. And the reason why I wanted to focus on that is because all of us are bombarded with this conversation that goes on.
Not just the schizophrenics. It's all of us.
Right. And that's why, one of the reasons why I really value your whole life story and premise, because we as individuals go through this every day. So we don't need to be schizophrenic to be dealing with these types of voices. And I'll give you a quick example. My whole life, I never, ever, ever thought about often myself walking, let's call it walking off the planet. Okay. So I never did. No matter how sad I was or anything in life that ever happened to me, I never, ever thought about that. Well, about 3 years ago, my husband passed away. And after 47, 8 years of marriage, it was obviously very devastating for me.
Oh, yeah.
And about a month after he passed, where I was able to be alone with my own thoughts and people weren't around, and, that all that stuff simmers down, I started hearing this voice in my head telling me to kill myself, actually. Like, why are you here? What, your husband's gone. You don't need to be here anymore. That kind of talk. I'll just leave it to folks' imaginations. And I knew that that wasn't me. It felt like it wasn't me. It felt like it was an outside attack.
That's the same feeling I had when I was dealing with this thing. I knew it wasn't me, but I didn't know what it was.
Exactly. So you're like freaked out at first because it's not you, but you're thinking it has to be me because it's inside my head. So you go through this whole struggle, but I fought it off with prayer. That was the way that I managed to get over that period. And then eventually it just stopped, which is even more bizarre. It wasn't like I refused to take antidepressants. My doctors wanted to give them to me. I absolutely refused. I refused tranquilizer. For me, it just was a no-go. Not that I'm saying for other people, everybody does what's good for them. But
those drugs cure nothing. They cure nothing. They cause more problems in the long run than they solve.
And I've seen it. I've seen it in people. I've seen it. I've seen the devastation that these drugs cause other people. So for everybody out there that's listening, I think it's really important for everyone to know that, like you had mentioned, I think when you were talking to Mark, that he was in his kitchen and all of a sudden he had a thought to turn around and like kill his dog or his kids or something. And then he said, well, where did that come from? That wasn't
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that for a second.
Yeah.
What is that? What do you think
Well,
that is?
that's them. That's
Yeah,
the same things that schizophrenics hear all the time.
all the time.
So,
Right.
so they attack all of us, and
Exactly.
and if you look at these patterns that these voices run, now this flies right in the face of the psychiatric mafia and big pharma and the universities, right
Right.
in the face. But it's like first they blame mothers for these voices.
Right.
The mothers did something to make the kids schizophrenic, and the mothers went, "What did we do?" You
Yeah.
know, so
Right.
that passed over. So then they went to genetics. So they're moving the thing up so the regular average everyday Joe cannot see what's going on. So if it's
Right.
genetics, you got a very small number of people who work in genetics who are able to verify that or not. But here they are broadcasting for a decade or so. Oh, it's genetics. And then the geneticists finally got around to go researching it, and they go, well, we don't see a schizophrenic gene.
Right.
So they jump up and they go, well, it's not just one gene, it's a whole bunch of genes. It's like thousands of them, and they're all intermixed, and we're sure it's genetics. We just don't have the right combination yet. So here they are keeping the awareness away from the people. So when the geneticists finally said, hey, we don't see it. We don't see it. You understand? We don't see it. It's not there. So they had to switch to something else. So then they went to the biochemical imbalance bullcrap, which they totally made up. It's a total lie.
Do you think they know, Jerry?
The what?
Do you think the medical community knows more than they're admitting to?
I don't
About
think psychiatry knows anything other than how to dish out drugs.
Yeah, it's like the
You know,
Stone Age. What?
no, they're totally ignorant. There's only they this one esoteric group, Misa, flew me to Romania to talk last summer, I think it was, and they said we want you to talk to two of our psychiatrists. These are esoteric yogis, and I'm like, what do they want with me? So after I met with them, they were nice people. I said, oh, okay, I'll go. And they went, we want you to talk to two of our psychiatrists. And I went, I don't think that's a good idea. And they just laughed. But those were the only two who knew what was going on.
Oh, no kidding.
They knew what was going on, but they couldn't tell anybody either. Just like while I was going through all this stuff, there was nobody I could talk to.
Yeah.
So once I got to the prison and I had these groups of prisoners around me that were telling me what their voices were saying in real time, then these patterns started coming out. More and more patterns started coming out.
Right.
So they they got louder after sunset. Now you can, for all of you psychiatrists and psychologists out there, you can see this for yourself. It's not hidden behind genetics. It's not hidden behind some biochemical stuff. It's right in front of your eyes. Go to my website, jerrymarzinsky.com, then go to articles, and then go to patterns. These are the patterns. So these are the operational definitions of the voices. This is what they are. How they behave is what they are. So they get louder after sunset. They get louder when ignored. And I remember psychiatrist after psychiatrist telling patients, "Oh, just ignore them. They're not real. They're yeah." So there should be articles on there somewhere.
Oh, here it is.
Okay, yeah, go there. Okay, so the list of list of patterns should be in there somewhere.
A list of lies.
I hope it's there.
Well, I'll make sure and this will go true for your website and all your links. I'll make sure as soon as this ends to put it in the description on my YouTube channel. So if you want to get all the links, make sure you head over to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled on YouTube, and I'll have all the links there for you guys. But when you get to his website, just click on articles, which you'll find right here.
Okay. That list of patterns should be in there somewhere.
Oh, here it is.
Okay. Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
All right. List of patterns. Okay. Again, this is the operational definition. So they get louder if ignored. So the psychiatrist will tell these people, oh, they're hallucinations, just ignore them. They're not real. No, doesn't work that way. You know, the first time I heard that, I called that patient back a week later and I said, you know, remember I was in the psychiatrist's office with you last week. He told you to ignore the voices, you know, that they were hallucinations. I asked him, I said, how's that going for you? He said, not well at all. They get louder when ignored. Okay.
Oh,
So they will not be ignored. They get louder. Okay. They foster self-destructive behavior. These people are cutting themselves. They're sabotaging themselves. They're getting in trouble with the law. They're getting locked up in jail.
Yeah.
They're self-destructing. Okay. And these things are pushing that. They foster isolation. They want the person alone in a room by himself. And a lot of times what these schizophrenic kids, they drive their parents so crazy that they just lock them in their room and say, go in your room. And then they can hear them talking to the voices in there.
Sure.
That's the worst thing they could do. They need to be kept occupied and their attention away from the voices. So they want the person isolated. They demand the attention of the victim. They maneuver for complete control. So what they're doing is they're pushing the actual personality out of the way and taking more and more control over the person to get them to do rotten stuff that gets them in trouble so they can feed off the negative energy that they generate.
Yeah, and sadly it ends up that way. Let me just take a quick midway break announcement. For those of you just tuning in, you're listening to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled with our guest, Jerry Marzinsky. We are live on United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, which is 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Thank you again so much for being here. And please, we have a chat room. So head on into the chat room if you want to ask Jerry any questions or make any comments. You're more than welcome to do that. So Jerry, what do you recommend that people do, like ordinary folks that aren't suffering from schizophrenia? What do you recommend they do? How do you deal with those negative voices in your head, especially when they're so bizarre, telling us to do weird things out of our nature? I've had that happen. I know probably every human has had that happen to them. What do you do about that? What's your advice?
The first thing you have to realize is those thoughts don't belong to you.
Right.
You know, nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's head during any autopsy.
Yeah, that's the truth.
You know, and psychiatry and psychology should be asking, where do thoughts come from? They don't. They totally ignore the situation. You know, it's assumed that every thought that comes into your head belongs to you. It's like, well, who else would it belong to? It's in your head, so it must be yours. That's not true. That's not the case. You know, your mind is like a radio receiver. It's tuned to a certain frequency. Those people tuned to a higher frequency are not going to hear those negative things as much. Mm-hmm. They're still going to hit them from time to time because they, you know, I think the demons get 10 points for every preacher they can knock out, you know, so that you look at all the sexual predation in the Catholic Church, you know, so you have to be aware that your thoughts don't come from you. The good Emanuel Swedenborg, Christian mystic, he lived some 300 years ago. He said, none of your thoughts come from you. They either come from heaven or they come from hell, you know, or somewhere in between. So you have to be aware that those thoughts, even though they seem to be yours, are not yours. You know, they're coming from somewhere else. But these negative ones that come in and start running you down, telling you bad things about yourself. And one of the most common I run into in my private practice is, you're worthless. You're stupid.
Yeah.
You know, you're never going to amount to anything.
You're
Your
fat,
worthless
you're
is one
ugly.
of the biggest ones that it just keeps coming up over and over and over again. You know,
Right.
so there's two sources that cause a lot of trouble. One is a negative identity, which is where that worthless thing comes from. It originates in a trauma. That trauma gets buried, but it's still alive. Okay, and you make a decision during that trauma and about who you are, and it's not a good decision. Right? So it stays in there, and it's like a mind virus, and it just keeps running and running over and over again. That's where Mace is really good about getting in there and dissolving that. So
Tell us about Mace, because a lot of folks don't know what that is. What's the website for that, Jerry?
it's causisminstitute.com, CAUSISM Institute, INSTITUTE.com. Okay, so there's a whole list of people. There's only about 50 of us certified on the planet right now. They don't want this getting out. The Mace people have taken it to the universities and demonstrated how well it worked. They blew it off. They then took it to their legislature. They said this should be used in all the mental health centers. This cures, gets rid of trauma, and it cures most psychological problems. They ignored it. So they're not wanting this getting out because it would destroy their market for psychiatric drugs. Most of what people take psychiatric drugs for can be handled by a Mace practitioner in an hour, and it's gone. And it's gone permanently. It doesn't come back. It's a permanent cure. Right? So these negative identities are sitting in your subconscious. They're masses of negative energy. Okay, so if you compare it to a car battery, if you take a car battery, a brand new car battery, and you drain it till it's all the way dead drained, you can't charge it up again. Okay, so these negative identities are psychological programs that were inserted unconsciously during a trauma, and they are masses of negative energy. And what Mace does is makes the connection to drain that with the energy running from negative to positive. So there's two components to Mace. One is a very scientific component, which deals with energy and the flow of energy and magnetism and energetic fields, all that kind of stuff. The second part is spiritual. So your spirit is also energy. So your mind is energy, your thoughts are energy, your memory is energy, your spirit is energy, you're an energetic being. And what psychiatrists are doing is pouring drugs on your brain, saying this is going to fix something. It doesn't fix anything. It's an energetic disturbance in your psyche. Okay.
Is that the right website right there?
Yep, that's the one. It'll tell you about it. And then they have a list of therapists, I think up in therapy at the top. Yeah.
So a person suffering from schizophrenia or any mental illness can find a therapist here?
Yes. Now, it won't get rid of schizophrenia for the most part. Now, I've seen it do it in some cases, in a few cases. But what it will do is it'll get rid of what these voices feed off of. It'll get rid of that negative energy that they feed off of. It'll get rid of that triggering thing, when you keep getting triggered over and over again. That's John Mace. He came up with it. He was not a psychiatrist or psychologist. He was a master mariner. He was a ship captain. And the guy was brilliant. He was absolutely
they don't only treat schizophrenic, right? Don't they? Is it all for all mental?
It's for all mental things, problems. Everything.
Okay, good. And this is obviously no pharmaceuticals. Is it talk therapy? What is it like? It's not.
No, it's not talk therapy. Matter of fact, the therapist doesn't even have to know what the trauma is. And there's a number of times where I've gotten up and I left and I'm like, I wonder what happened to her.
Wow.
It's weird. It's strange. It's almost unbelievable. It's akin to magic as far as I'm concerned. I've never, ever seen anything that works as well as this in my entire 50 years in mental health. This would supplant psychiatry. This would supplant psychology. But they don't want it out.
They don't want it out. Of course not. Of course not. I mean, it's sad when you think about the state of mental health in this country, globally even. and the progress that it's made. It's like almost barbaric.
They haven't made any progress. You look at what's happening in the U.S. 50,000 people a year are killing themselves. That's as many as died in all of the Vietnam War, year after year after year after year. And a good many of those people are on antidepressants, which in many cases trigger the suicide. They don't fix it, or on antipsychotics. So these people aren't being cured. So where is the thought to kill yourself coming from?
Right.
It's coming from these same demons we were talking about. Okay. So, the drug companies, the antipsychotic sales have soared to $14.54 billion in 2021. These are destructive drugs. They rot out your brain. They cause permanent psychiatric damage or neurological damage with long-term use. They mess up your memory. They mess you up. They cause physiological damage with long-term use. They are not telling people that. They say, "Oh, it'll make your eyes blurry. You'll feel sluggish. Your mouth will get dry. You'll get used to it." They won't tell them that. Nor will they allow that to be published in the journals. The drug companies, the drug companies skew the research. They won't allow anything about the dangers of these drugs to be published in any of the big journals. All right. Antidepressant market is expected to hit 15.98 or almost $16 billion by 2023. Doesn't cure anything. Matter of fact, in the long run, people are usually better without it.
Didn't they also find that a lot of the, we got to be careful how we phrase this, a lot of the incidences at schools, if you get my point, were happening from massive amounts of these types of medications being
they're finding a lot of those shooters are on psychiatric drugs.
Yeah. It's tragic.
It's really bad. I mean, these drugs are actually killing people. It's
and if you look at, like, I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I do watch it, it's a bombardment of pharmaceutical ads.
Yes. Yep. And that's illegal in Europe. Yet they're doing it here because the drug companies, they have so much money, they pay off everybody.
That's correct. Isn't it just New Zealand and the United States it's allowed? I don't think it's allowed any other country.
I don't think so either.
It's
out of every 100 people treated with antipsychotic drugs, it kills 1 to 2 of them.
Oh my word.
The these diagnosis things that they came up with, it's a fantasy.
Oh my word.
All those diagnoses are made up. There is not a single objective test or clinical test or lab work or anything to test for any one of those almost 300 diagnoses they have now. And they make up more and more every year. They're just made up out of thin air.
That's disgraceful.
2/3 of the people who sit on those committees making up those diagnoses are under the influence of the drug industry. So they sit there and they make up these diagnoses, and then they go, "Welcome me. We make a drug that looks like it treats this thing, and if it does, it gets in there."
And I don't doubt it at all. And I think that the rest of the globe is now waking up more and more every day, ever since COVID and what we were put through. So it's a good thing now that a lot of this truth is floating to the surface, and we're getting to realize. But and I know that Kennedy is supposed to be stopping or doing something to stop these pharmaceutical ads, but
they're not going to like him. They're going to do everything they can to knock him out of there.
That's correct. They will. But these pharmaceutical ads, to me, are so dangerous to your psyche. Not only if you take half this stuff, there are some medications that do help folks. I'm not going to, degrade them all. There are some medications.
There's some people that are so psychotic, you have to put them on there. But for long-term use, it's destructive.
For physical problems, heart conditions, things like that. There are some good pharmaceutical drugs, so I'm not going to bash them all. The thing that disturbs me is the hounding of you can't go on the internet without getting a pharmaceutical ad thrusted in your face.
Yeah, right in your face.
It's a psyop. The whole thing.
Oh, I got the sun going down in
Yeah,
my
I
face
see
here.
that. I see that.
Uh,
You want to
this-
shut it? Can you?
no, I can't, but I can get a hat. Let me get a hat.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Take your time. Um, we have a good amount of time left, and I did have a bunch of questions to ask Jerry. I wanted to arm folks with,
I think psychiatry is probably one of the most diabolic
yeah, well,
segments
that's better.
of medicine.
So, Jerry, I was just saying, I was asking you before, what can we do to arm ourselves, to protect ourselves from these internal voices that we hear that we know are not us? The self berating, the belligerent voices, the voices telling you to do something, like even road rage, like when you're driving and you hear these voices telling you, flip this guy the bird, cut him off. Those are not, they're not our voices.
No.
What can we do to protect ourselves from these things?
If you get mad, if you get triggered like that, you're out of control.
Right.
That's a negative identity. Okay. So Mace can help that. But I think the number one thing is to realize that not all your thoughts that come into the head are yours. Virtually every negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from the dark side. Okay. You got to realize that. Now, you can use the That's a Lie program. That works for a lot of them.
What is that now? What is that? Oh, That's a Lie.
That's a Lie program, because 98% of what these things tell you are lies.
That thing works like a charm. I started doing that, and I'll put the link in the video, so you have to check it out. When I read that and I started implementing that myself, I got to tell you, I've been telling everybody about it because I think it works like a charm.
Well, that was developed by Sherry Sweeney, my co-author,
right,
on this book.
Let me see if I could get that open. I highly recommend that.
So if you want to find out how we came to the conclusion that these things were entities and not hallucinations.
Yes.
In this book. Now, Sherry was the first sane person that I could talk to about the voices. So for years, I had to keep all this to myself. There was nobody I could talk to. I couldn't even talk to my wife because she'd go, "You shouldn't be picking through the heads of these crazy killers anyway. You shouldn't be doing that."
Right, right.
You know, so she came up with this program and it cured her of schizophrenia. So I had known her for 10 years before she admitted to me that she was hearing voices, you know. So we were working together on prison reform. And one day I was telling her about one of the prisoners I was working with. And she said, "Oh, I know all about that." I said, "Well, what do you mean you know all about that?" She goes, "Oh, I heard voices when I was a young woman." That's 10 years after I met her.
Wow.
So that's how much of a stigma this stuff has. And it's nothing that everybody doesn't experience to some extent. But when they get in there and they start taking over, that's a whole different story. You know.
So tell us a little bit about this program, and you know, like, just I'll put the links to make sure, because it's so important for you guys to read this information. Tell us a little bit about That's a Lie program.
Well, Sherry, she was an engineer, so she has a very engineer computer like mind. All right. And she realized that this was like a malfunctioning computer program.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that there were errors in the code, and those errors were spitting out errors in her thinking. Okay. So what these things do is they don't care what they tell you as long as they can upset you. That's their bottom goal, is to get you upset, to get you angry, to get you feeling bad. They want that negative emotion because that's what they feed off of.
Right. The loosh.
So what they will do, they'll throw any thought in your head that they think will trigger your getting negatively emotional. Okay. Now the other thing they do is because they're energetic and your thoughts are energy, they can go into your mind. They can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done, and they can start throwing it into your face. I had one person, one that I was working with. He borrowed a quarter from somebody like 20 years ago, and he never paid it back. And here they
What?
are going, "You're a rotten person. You never paid that guy back. You took his quarter. You stole it from him." It doesn't matter. They will tell you any lie, and I'd say probably 95% of everything they tell you is a lie.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it'll be like, "Oh, you said something wrong to that person," or "You shouldn't have said that," or "You shouldn't have done that." And then they'll start this remuneration crap. Where it just goes round and round and round and round, and each time it goes round, it's generating more negative emotion.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's what drives people to commit heinous acts of violence as well.
Mm. And they project everything out onto everybody else. It's not
Right.
your fault, it's their fault. It's everything there. So use the That's a Lie program. First, realize that not all your thoughts are yours. Virtually
Right.
every negative thought comes into your mind as a lie. If you realize it's a lie, then it doesn't impact you. It's like, oh well,
Correct.
that's just a lie. What I
Oh,
do is
so good. It
what I
works
do
so
is I visualize when I get a negative thought that I know is not mine. I visualize putting a flash hand grenade on it and sending it back to where it came from,
Oh, I
and then
like that.
then visualizing it exploding in this big flash of light down there because they hate light. You know,
Oh, that's good.
so it's like, okay, and then if it comes back, oh, you want another one, huh? So because what I found at one point is what you imagine happening to them actually happens to them.
Oh, is that right?
That's right. So what I found is when I was working in the emergency room doing psych crisis, and they were dragging these guys in off the street, and they were raw. They were floridly psychotic. They were on drugs. They were, you know. So I had to determine what was wrong with them and whether we should admit them or turn them back to the street or send them to a mental health center, get their parents
Yeah.
to come pick them up. So I had to have the information, but they were so floridly psychotic they couldn't concentrate. They go, well, the voices, I can't. The voices, So I'd visualize the voices having duct tape wrapped around their mouth so they couldn't speak.
Oh, I like that.
And then I would ask the person, okay, have they shut up? And most of the time they go, yeah, they shut up. And then I'd be able to get the information I needed. There was one time it was real interesting though. Uh, I'd tell them to wrap their mouths in duct tape and then launch them off into space. Now that wouldn't last long. It might last 20 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour or an hour. It didn't last long before they came back, but it gave me enough time to find out what was going
Sure.
on. Okay. There was one time where I did that and I said, have the voices shut up? The guy said, well, kind of. And I said, well, what do you mean kind of? He goes, well, they're doing this now. They're going.
Oh my goodness.
I went, well, ain't that interesting?
So
Yeah.
what you do to them in your mind's eye is actually happening to them.
It actually happens to them. So you can visualize them being struck by lightning. They hate love. They can't stand positive stuff.
Right, right.
So if you visualize them being surrounded in God's love, they can't stand it.
Oh, sure.
So the 23rd Psalm is another one. They can't. It's like burning them with a blowtorch. They can't stand the 23rd Psalm. They can't stand Psalm 91. I would memorize it.
Does an exorcism ever help schizophrenia?
You know what? I think it's like the Bible says. You can clean out that room, but if you don't fill it with something else, they'll come back. And they do. And I've seen that happen. They come back with their friends. So the ultimate solution is getting on a positive spiritual path and staying there.
Right.
And the Muslims are much more aware of these things than we are. They call them the jinn. They have specific prayers.
Yeah.
They call them it's the entity that's whispering in your ear. They're much more aware of these things than we are. The other thing is guardian angels. Working in the emergency room, time after time after time, I saw people who made suicide attempts who, by all reasons, should have been dead. They did something that just should have killed them, and it didn't. Something interfered over and over again. This was so common. I should have wrote them down, but it was so common I didn't. I just remember a handful of them.
Yeah.
There's one woman who everything was going wrong in her life. She got divorced. She got fired. She didn't have any money. Her rent was due. She had a kid that was causing her trouble. Everything was going wrong. So
Yeah.
she decided, I'm going to go out to the train track, to a town south of here. I'm going to wait for the train to come, and I'm going to drive my car in front of that train. So she's saying goodbye to her sister in San Diego when the train's coming. So she hung up, waited for the train to get close. She drove onto the track, and the train just plowed into her. And then it
Oh,
threw her car into the next track, and another train came and hit her again. She was hit twice
what?
by two trains, and that train threw her 50 yards off the track. The car was a crumpled piece of tin. They couldn't get her out. They had to get those jaws of life thing and cut her out. 2 hours later, she's sitting in front of me in the ER, and I'm doing a psych evaluation on her, and all she's got is a black eye.
That's incredible. That's
You know,
incredible.
and I was like, how does this happen? Yeah. So I said, when you came to, I asked her, I said, what were you thinking when you came to? She said, I was furious. I wanted to be dead. I did not want to be here. I was absolutely furious. And I said, well, what happened after that? Anything? She goes, well, I heard this voice come out of nowhere, and it said, everything's going to be fine. And
Oh,
she said she felt this complete peaceful feeling just wash over her. Right. And she had this knowing that everything was going to be fine. So after I got done with her, I'm kind of going, well, I don't think she's suicidal anymore. I think she learned her lesson,
mm,
but I didn't think psychiatry was going to allow her out of the hospital. So I wrote up my report, not expecting them to let her out after a suicide attempt that bad, and they
yeah.
did.
What?
Another guy with a 357 Magnum, all the cylinders loaded, all 6 cylinders, put it to his head, click, to the ground, bang, to his head, click, to the ground, bang. He goes, okay, I got it. What's that chances of that happening?
Yeah.
Another guy with a 45, put it to his head, pulled the trigger, click, didn't go off. He took that same gun with the same bullet to the range, the pistol range the next day, pulled the trigger on that bullet, and it went off.
See, that's divine intervention right there.
Yes, yes, there are
Absolutely.
guardian angels. They are
Absolutely.
there. You have two of them, but you have two demons assigned to you also.
See, now I remember you saying that each one of us has two demons and two angelic
Mhm.
entities.
And they're constant. It's just like the cartoons, only it's real. You got these demons telling you this crap. You got the angels going, oh, don't do that. But the angels, the angelic force,
Yeah.
they speak more in feeling and intuition than they do in words. These guys speak in words. You're no
Oh,
good. You're ugly. You're stupid. You're
they
worthless.
know that's how they get us. They know that's how they to get us. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. So pray to your guardian angels. They can't help you if you don't ask them. They have to
right.
just sit there and watch this thing going on with you.
You have to
You know,
pray.
you have
Whoever
to
you
pray.
pray to, whatever spiritual or religious belief, pray to it because I know for me, that's what saved me during my time,
And if you can send them love, I never could do that because they're so despicable. If you can send them love, they hate that. They
yeah,
can't
how
stand it.
that's
If you pray for them, they can't stand that.
oh, really? Yeah,
Oh,
that makes
really? Yeah, for real. You know,
that's hard to do though, to pray for a demon.
I
Good.
know. I couldn't do it. You know, so they don't want you to be happy. They don't want you to laugh. They can't
Yeah,
stand you laughing or be happy. So watch comedy, do things that make you laugh, that make you
yeah.
feel good. They don't want you feeling good. Okay? So you asked me a while back, you said, at what point did I realize these things were demons? Uh,
Yes.
It was at least 2 decades into into my work. You know,
Wow.
it, maybe more than 20 years. And here's all this evidence building and building and building. Anybody, I didn't want to believe it, but anybody else would have looked at that and went, well, there's something going on here. These are entities. I mean, if they looked at all the information, but I just wasn't buying it. So what I found is they were running these patterns, and I got wondering, I said, what would happen if I started tripping up their patterns? What if I started giving out work assignments to these prisoners that would trip up their patterns? Pray the 23rd Psalm, do this thing, pray, ask your guardian,
Right.
And it wasn't too long before they started coming back saying, the voices don't like that. They don't like you. They don't want us coming here. They think you're stupid, you're crazy, they don't want us coming here. But they kept coming anyway. So sometimes it got a little touchy because I had to hold their trust. Because
Right.
if I went to a psychiatrist and said, this guy's planning to kill a guard, or he's thinking
Sure.
about killing a guard, that would have been it. None of those guys would have ever trusted me again. I would have lost those groups.
Absolutely. You know
And
what?
that did happen once.
Right.
Where the guy came in and said, this guard disrespected me. The voices want me to kill him. They want me to stab him.
I remember you telling that story.
Yeah.
There's another story you told that was fascinating, and we have a good 18 minutes left. If you don't mind, maybe you could reiterate that. It was when you were questioning one of your patients and you saw that electrical thing.
Yeah. See,
When
that's
I'm
where
going to put you on stage. I'm going to remove myself for a minute, but please tell that story because I think folks need to hear this. This is fascinating.
Okay. So there's one thing that happened before that. The prisoners started coming back saying, the voices don't like you. They don't like what you're telling us to do. They don't want us coming here. Okay. So that's kind of like one warning. And it wasn't just one of them. It was a number of them. They were all telling me, the voices don't like what you're doing. I was interfering with their patterns. Okay. So the next thing that happened is one guy I was working with, after we did our session, he turns around in the doorway and he looks at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I didn't think about it. I mean, it wasn't in my mind. And I just looked at him and he turned around and walked away. And I went, well, that's interesting. So I kept it in the back of my mind. I didn't forget it, but it was like, okay, where'd that come from? Okay. So it was kind of like, that was like another warning. Okay. So a few weeks later, another guy I was working with, what I did is I was reading a book called The Voice of Knowledge by Miguel Ruiz, who's a shaman. He's a South American shaman. And it talked about the voices, and it talked about them being energy parasites. So I brought that book into the prison, and I brought this one prisoner in, and I said, I'm going to read you this paragraph. I want you to tell me what you think about it, because I was always asking him questions. What about this? What about that? What did they say? What do they do when you did this? I was always interrogating him. So I started reading that, and when it got to the point where the guy was talking about these things being energetic vampires, this crackling broke out behind my head. It was like an electrical crackling. It sounded just like an arc welder. And it was going crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the frick is happening here? And I'm looking around, I don't see anything. And then it moves over to the right wall of my office and it starts crackling up the right wall. And I look at the prisoner and he looks like a zombie. He's just staring at me like he's possessed or something, just staring, with this blank stare. And here's this thing moving around my office. It goes up to the top and then it starts cutting across the ceiling where the wall came up on the other side. So I was afraid to take my eyes off him because I thought he was going to attack. So I pushed my chair against the wall just in case he does, so I could push him back. And then the thing starts crackling down the left wall, and I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I don't. It's just this crackling, and it went on for like 15, 20 seconds, maybe longer. It wasn't just a brief thing that you could explain away. It was there. And then it jumped into this Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg and it's crackling in that trash can. And I bend over and I look in there, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's empty. The inmate porter had cleaned it last night. There's not even a piece of paper in there. I look up and I asked this guy, I said, did you hear that? And he just slowly gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And
Oh,
he shuffles out of the office. And I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Go, get out of here. So it that's when I realized that these things were demons.
yeah. Do you think that was a warning to you?
Yes.
Do you? Yeah, that's what it sounds like
Yeah,
to me.
that was. And I called him back. It took me 2 months before I got the courage to call him back. And I asked him, started talking to him. I didn't want to call him back for that. I didn't want to see him again. So after 2 months, my curiosity got the best of me, and I called him back and I said, hey, you remember when the last time you were in here? And he goes, yeah. I said, did you hear that crackling? And he goes, yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised you did, meaning me.
Oh.
And I said, what was that? And he said, that was them.
Oh,
And I said, them who? He said, the voices.
that would have freaked me right out right
It
there.
did freak me out, and it freaked me out because now they were affecting physical reality. Before
Right.
that, I didn't think they could affect physical reality. So this is a whole different dimension now.
Jeez.
If they can affect physical reality, what
Sure.
else can they do?
Did anything like that ever happen to you afterwards? Any similar
Not
where
like
they
that.
not like that?
Not like that. So let me see. What did I ask him? I said, you looked awful weird when you left my office that day. I said, what were the voices telling you when you left the office? He said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut.
Oh,
And I was going, oh, he wouldn't have done that. I've been working with him for 6 months. I know this guy. He's pretty decent, down out other than his voices. And I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one.
oh.
That sent
Yeah, that had to freak you
chills
right
up my spine. I don't think I could have done this if I wasn't a adrenaline junkie. And if I
Yeah,
were an adrenaline junkie, I would have backed off of this a long time ago.
based on your hobbies. Well, you also were into motorcycles and stuff, right?
Yeah, motorcycles and flying and scuba diving, and but that was an adrenaline overload that day.
Yeah. So what do you plan on doing moving forward now? I mean, obviously you're doing all of these interviews and getting the word out about Mace and That's a Lie program. And do you have another book in the works? Like you have all these
I have all this stuff here. I
Yeah.
should be doing it. My private practice has taken off. I'm booked all the way to the end of February now and into March. I should be writing a book, but boy, it was so hard. It was just so difficult. So what I'm thinking about doing is maybe putting some of these stories on my blog. If I ever get tired of doing, because these people are being helped. I mean, they're coming in with serious problems and they're leaving with those problems gone. I mean, this Mace is as close to magic in psychotherapy as I've ever seen. It actually works. It actually gets rid of these problems, and they go out of there feeling that thing is gone. The unworthiness, and you go. They come in saying, "Well, I feel worthless," and they finished the session an hour later, and I said, "Can you convince me that you're worthless now?" And they smile and they go, "No, I can't. It's gone."
Is Mace therapy done remotely, or do you have
Yes.
to do?
No, you can do it over the internet. I'm working with people all over the planet. It's interesting. Working all over the Western world, really. And in an hour, it can get stuff taken care of that years of regular psychotherapy couldn't touch.
Wow. And this is for people with any type of mental illness,
Any kind of mental problems.
things like that.
Yep, obsessive compulsive stuff. Depression, manic stuff. I mean, it works, and if it doesn't completely clear it, it will get rid of a lot of a lot of the stuff that feed it. That's what,
Right.
mostly with schizophrenia, a lot of times it won't get rid of the voices, but it gets rid of the trauma that these voices keep triggering over and over again. So
That's
that body of loosh, or that body of food that they've been triggering, is gone. It's no longer available to them.
Oh, goodness. We have to check that out for sure. It sounds almost too good to be true, but
Yeah, I know it is.
Is it a group therapy thing, or is it just
No,
singular?
it has to be done individually. There's no group about it. Yes, it's an individual thing. It's the person. So what we're actually doing is connecting that negative identity, that negative energy, which is negative, making a bridge to the spirit.
Yeah.
Once that bridge is made, the attention serves as the pipeline, and it flows to the spirit. The spirit takes it and dismantles it, turns it into positive energy, and turns it back over to the individual. So they're feeling more energy when it's done. They're feeling calmer, and whatever problem they came in with, for the most part, is gone, and it doesn't come back. It's like a car battery. Once you drain it down to nothing, you can't charge it back. Once you drain this negative energy down to nothing, it doesn't come back, doesn't return. So a person who's felt worthless all their lives no longer feels that when they're done. And I feel so sorry for these older people that come in there like, 75, and they've been living with this sense of worthlessness their entire life.
Right.
It's destroyed their entire life, and now it's gone. Had they known that decades ago, they would have been a totally different person. Their life would have been totally different.
Now, is this the type of therapy that you provide for your private practice clients as well? It is.
Yes. Yeah, along with what I know about schizophrenia, but I'm not an exorcist.
No. But for let's just reiterate, for us folks that are hearing these voices, you're saying stay connected spiritually, empower yourself with spirituality or religion or whatever.
Well, yeah, the only thing that's really going to keep them away is getting in touch with God, getting on a positive spiritual path and staying there.
Yes.
That's what's going to keep them away.
I know with the interview you did with Mark, what was her name? Judy?
Yeah.
Yeah, she did that. She was gravely schizophrenic, right?
Yeah.
And she cured herself by connecting to God, right? And religion.
Well, it's God or Jesus or the spirit that cured her.
Right.
Now, Sherry's with the That's a Lie program. See, if they can't get you to believe the bull crap that they're filling your head with,
right,
then they can't get their claws in you. So if you realize they're lying and that they're consummate liars, kind of like Joe Biden and that whole crew there, constant liars.
Constant.
You realize that you can't believe anything they say.
Right.
Then they can't get you.
So you're filling all of this space with Jesus and God instead of all of this demonic, and they have no room really to attack you, right?
Well, yeah, you want to take that empty room and spend it doing stuff you like, hobbies, reading, going to church.
Right.
They don't. They want you to be isolated. They want you to be sitting there listening to their crap all day. That's the worst thing you can do. Schizophrenic needs to be kept busy.
It just makes so much sense, Jerry. Well, I have to thank you so much. Like I said, I've been a fan watching so many of your interviews, and I'm really grateful that you joined us today. And I still have so many other questions on my list to ask you, and I know your schedule is hectic and crazy, but I'd like to connect with you again down the road when you have some free time.
Oh, I'll make free time.
Awesome. Good. I'll reach out to you via email because I have at least 20 other questions based on a lot of the documents you sent me and videos I've watched. And I would really I think it's so important to get this out there to folks.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think
because psychiatry is doing the exact opposite of what needs to be done. Here they're telling these people, "Oh, it's just all in your mind. It's you. You're the broken one. Your mind is broken.
Yes.
The only thing you can do is take these toxic drugs and pay me hundreds of dollars every visit, and then pay hundreds of dollars for these toxic drugs that are rotting your brain out.
Exactly.
They're diabolic. They're just diabolic.
I agree. There's such a better way to do it through Mace and to the information. That's a lie program. There's healthy ways to tackle this. And I love fighting these demon no-gooders. So I totally am on board with your whole premise behind this. So Jerry, thank you so much. I will be in touch with you via email either tonight or tomorrow so we can schedule a part 2, because like I said, I have so many more questions and you're such a great resource for folks. God bless you for doing this work.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Jerry. I will be in touch.
Okay, we'll set something up.
Thank you so much. God bless.
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Take care. Oh, of course. Thanks for being here. It's our pleasure. Thank you, dear.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, folks. So we will definitely have a part 2 with Jerry, because this information, as you could see, is so essential. And I have so many other questions that need to be answered. And I know Jerry is the person to be able to help us with that. So I will definitely keep you posted when we will have a part 2. But again, I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We were live, and we still are live, on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, which is 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. And every week, there are a plethora of shows just like this one, ranging in topics from ancient history to ufology, paranormal, extraterrestrial, conspiracy theories, history, mysticism, you name it, any type of high strangeness you will find on this network. So please be sure and join us, and head over to Ethereal Encounters on YouTube. I will have all the links where you can do that. It's called Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. Please subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. It means the world to me when you do. Thank you so much for joining us today. God bless you all, and stay tuned for next Thursday. Bye-bye, guys.